great when we can all gather together and worship such a great God, an awesome God. I want a special welcome to our visitors this morning. A pretty good crowd. Our family matters, a couple of notes. Special day salutes this week. Birthdays, Ed Phillips, 11/28. Jeannie, 11/30. George Henderson, December 1st. And Donna White, December 7th. And the back table back here, we have the new church calendar and service schedule. So be sure to get one of those. And then don't forget, in the morning between 9 and 9:15, we have coffee and pastries. So be here to take part of that. And if you're planning to attend the Louisville Lads and Leaders Convention on March 29th to April 1st, please let Stephen Flass know ASAP. 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 Yeah, thank you, Judy. Let Stephen know as soon as you can. He has to get that in because reservations and stuff have to be made. And I don't think you want to be sleeping in your car down there. And then next Sunday, December 3rd, there'll be a practice session for the lads to leaders, singers, the girls. And they request that all the ladies stay right after services for that and kind of support them in that and sing along with them. So keep that in mind and make it a point to be there. The Youth Christmas Party, Friday p.m. December 8th at the Lombardi's home, at Jay's home. The youths are all invited there.
Dick,
Yes.
we need to have a short meeting, so when church is over, I need to see all the young people at the back of the building for like 3 minutes, but we need to have a quick talk about the date. So,
Okay, did everybody get that right after services? All the youths meet with Jay about the date so that we can get it all coordinated. And we have a change due to our Thanksgiving holiday with so many people that were traveling and a lot of family visiting different people. And we're going to not have evening worship service this evening. And we'll also not have a covered dish luncheon for the first Sunday. It's kind of give everybody a rest from cooking. I know Deb needs it. She cooked a 19-pound turkey and all the fixings and pies, and wow, that's a lot of work. Our midweek Bible study, Great Bible Chapters, resumes this Wednesday, the 29th. Keith Chopik's going to be leading us in that class from 1 Samuel 15. And upcoming classes will be December 5th, will be Luke 15, Bob Villers. The 13th, Keith Chopik again with Psalms 23. And December 20th will be Luke 2, Stephen Flass. So you can keep an eye on that one. Christmas caroling, Saturday, December 16th. We're going to get together and do that. And I was glad to hear during Bible class that you don't have to have an operatic voice to be able to take part in that. So that it's going to go to the Clearview Lantern in Champion. That's to see Dick Jones, and Gillette, where Mary Stottlemyre is at. Okay, then the group will go to a nearby restaurant and sing for the meal. I have a thank you card. Thank you all so much for the prayers and card, and especially to Carrie. Love and prayers and Christian love, Nellie Trent. Nellie, we're glad to have you back with us, along with Lois. We're glad to have her back with us today. And you'll notice that, Larry and Carol were going to be on their way to Florida. But on a sad note, their daughter, Chris, her husband, Doug's brother, passed away. He had cancer pretty bad, and I guess they pulled the plug. year and what comes of that. So we want to keep them in our prayers, along with so many on our prayer list. Let's go to our God in prayer. Our God and Father, we're grateful that we're able to gather here today and worship and praise and honor you, to lift our voices in song to you, to be attentive to the word that Terry presents this morning, that we may grow spiritually and grow closer to you in a relationship with you. Father, we bring to you all those on our prayer list, that you will be with them, that you will help them, that you will heal them. We thank you for those that have recovered and shows that you do answer prayer. Be with those who attend to our sick. Encourage them, enrich them. And Father, we pray for all our young people that they will maintain a relationship with you and that we will do what we can to help them along their walk. We thank you for our elderly, for the great example they show us. Help us, one and all, to be forgiving as you have forgiven us, to be loving as you have loved us, to be caring as you have cared for us, and continue to do so. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
We begin this morning with number 396. We may be playing a little tag team on the song this morning. My throat on the church and hold up, so I tag out. Steve can step in if you need to. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. None else could heal our soul's diseases. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide until the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. No friend like him is so high and holy. No, not one. No, not one. And yet a friend is so meek and lowly. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide us till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. There's not an hour that he is not near us. No, not one. No, not one. No lights of dark, but his love can cheer us. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Our next song will be number 448. 448. For those that might be new to this song, each part gets added. We start with the alto, and then the bass come in, the tenor, and the soprano. Love one another, for love is of God. He who loves is born of God and knows for opening prayer number 722. 722.
Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. All His wonderful passion and purity. May His Spirit divine all my being refine. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. When somebody has been so unkind to you, some word spoken that pierces you through and through, think how He was begun, set upon and revived. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. From the dawn of the morning to close of day, in example, in deeds and in all you say, lay your gifts at His feet, ever strive to keep sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you.
Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, I want to thank you for this beautiful day you've given to us to come here and to worship you and praise your holy name, Father. Father, as we go throughout the worship today, please help us to have a right mind and a right heart as we take in the words of you and learn more about you, Father, and help us to apply whatever we learn today. Take it and apply it to our everyday lives whenever possible. Father, I want to thank you for all that you've done, how you bless us, how you give us our health, our food, our clothing, our homes, and just being here today and giving us life, Father. Most of all, sending your only begotten Son to die on that cruel cross for our sins. Father, I want to thank you for the military and the armed forces as they are off fighting foreign lands. Father, help them to be safe and bring them home safely to their families. Father, you are so great and you are so wonderful. We have so much to be thankful for, Father, as we come here today as throughout the week. But let us not only be thankful during this week, help us to be thankful throughout every day of the year and to praise you for all that we have. Father, you are so great and you are so wonderful. You do so much in our lives and we cannot thank you enough for it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
The offering this morning will be number 720, will be on the screen. And now number 484 to prepare lines for Lord's Supper, and anyone who uses the books for this 484 will take out their song.
There's a really interesting study that was done the other day, and it was done on, I think, the University of London. It's not real important from that side. I think it's kind of a garbage study, but it talks about that people that go to the gyms and work out are more likely to be narcissistic, and it kind of bashes them for being people that are arrogant or think highly of themselves, think of themselves as better. And my experience, I kind of picture that being someone who's not been to a gym, hasn't worked out. In my experience, it's been more somebody who is broken or hurting, and they're trying to deal with life, trying to get through life, and that they need that outlet to go work out, or they don't feel that they're healthy, they don't feel they're good enough, that there's somebody who's trying to make themselves better, and that they need that outlet, they need the friendships, they need that kind of stuff. Not somebody who's high and mighty, but the exact opposite. And I can't help but think what people think of us in the church. We get referred to as being narcissistic. We get referred to being thought of as being somebody who's better than everybody else because we believe that we're being saved. And if you aren't like us, if you don't have Jesus, then you're not saved. We're narcissistic, we're bad. And the reality of it is also the exact opposite. I feel like we're the ones that are broken. We need a Savior. We need somebody to help us. We have needs. We want to strengthen each other. We want to show love. The exact opposite of what being narcissistic would be. Well, let's look back here and see where this was born from with the Passover and the breaking of the bread and where this starts with Jesus. In Matthew 26, we have Jesus starting out by saying, "You know that after 2 days, Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." And we go on a few more verses. Jesus is anointed. And so we have Jesus who, he begins by saying, "I'm about to be crucified. Now, if this is me, breaking bread and, drinking the fruit of the vine, that's probably not my concern if I know I'm about to be killed in 2 days. But Jesus is there, he's focusing about us, and he does this for us. He says, now as they were eating, Jesus took bread. Well, let's back up a little bit more here. Jesus then has Judas who reaches in. Jesus says, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man of whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Jesus, who would betray him, answered, "Is it I, Rabbi?" He said to him, "You have said so." And so these things are all happening together. Now as they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Jesus is about to be killed, he's about to be broken. And yet he does this for our benefit. He doesn't need communion. He doesn't need any of this. He doesn't need to die. But he does this for us. He serves us. And this is the exact opposite of what giving our sister is. He's giving up his life. Yes, we must go to him and be saved. For us, we couldn't be more broken. We need a Savior. And he's offered up his body for us. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you so much for what you've given to us. You offered up your body. You had no need to do any of that for us. Lord, but you knew that we were broken. You knew that we needed you. You knew that we needed support in things like a church. That we couldn't make it on our own. That God, to have loving friends. To have help with our mental strength, with our physical strength, with needs, whether it be clothing, especially at this time of the year, Lord, we think a lot of food and even things like presents that are for our pleasure. Lord, we pray that we can remember you most of all. You gave up your life for pray. Lord, you offered up your blood for us so that you were able to cover our sins. Lord, you don't expect us to be perfect, but you expect us to try. And Lord, that we know the reality is that we are sinful, we are unable to save ourselves, Lord. But you stepped in to make us something beautiful in your sight. Please bless the Spirit and Father as we take it. It's in your name we pray. Amen. When someone is new to the gym, there's no narcissism found there. They're not narcissistic at all. They're hurting, they're broken. You know, they think they're dying before they get up and work out. And it's a struggle. You can see sometimes how people can view it as being narcissistic. Because somebody who's been there for a long time, they've been doing it for a long time, and go through the motions. They've made sacrifices. They made sacrifices with their nutrition. They begin to believe, oh, well, I deserve to be healthy. And you can see where there would be an air of, maybe I just start to look down on somebody else because they're not doing the sacrificing that you're doing. When in reality, when you started out, you were trying to make your body better, you're trying to serve. I wonder, as we're in the church, when you get somebody new to the church, especially somebody who's older, who's really understood who they were without God and the sin that they've done in their life, there's no narcissism there. They're broken, and they are so thankful for having God. But I wonder, I always picture it as the Jews and things we were talking about this morning. They've gone on so long, and they've sacrificed. They've tried to do right. They get up in the morning, they go to church, they do things for God. They do things to serve people. And after a long time, that can look like you deserve it, or you're earning your keep with God. And sometimes we need way checks to remember. We're not deserving of anything. God has blessed us. We're still broken people. We just have a loving God. And we don't deserve it. Let us pray. Lord, we pray that we're able to get we don't live as people that are narcissists, that we don't live as ourselves thinking that we're higher and mightier than other people. That we may have a mighty place, but that's because of you, because of your grace, because you loved us. And that this is open for all, that we can reach out to others, and that we can serve them, that we can show them love, that we don't look down on them, but we say that we can help, that we love you, and we reach them in their broken places, and we remember that we are still broken. We're not made perfect. We're not made perfect yet. Lord, you cover our sins before you, but we still have sin. Lord, I pray that we can reach out and love others, whether that's financially or in other ways, Lord, physically. I pray that you help us to serve, especially in this time of the year, that it's not about receiving, that it's about giving, just as you gave for us. It's in your name we pray.
We are one in the bond of love. We are one in the bond of love. We have joined our spirit with the Spirit of God. We are one in the bond of love. Let us sing now, everyone. Let us feel His love begun. Let us join our hands that the world will know we are one in the bond of love.
Psalm meditation this morning will be number 136. You go forward, Stephen. I think I forgot to put that in there.
That's 381 there.
Yeah, sorry, I guess for 136 for invitation, if you can mark 136 when you use our books, I apologize. Now before our scripture reading and sermon, number 771. This will be on the screen, 771.
Lord, speak to me that I may speak in living echoes of thy tone. As thou hast sought, so let me seek thine erring children lost and
stand for the word of God. I'll be reading from Colossians 4, 5 through 6. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Congregation said? Amen.
I can remember when Keith was just a little boy when he first started reading. Hey, let's play a little game here. Somebody can keep track if you want to. But what did you eat on Thanksgiving Day? You can name one item and no duplication. Let's see what our table looks like. Somebody start us off. Turkey. One at a time. Ham. Say it again, Keith. Cranberries.
Corn casserole.
Corn casserole.
Okay, corn pudding, I don't know.
Corn pudding.
Cherry pie.
Oyster stuffing. What else?
Cherry pie.
Cherry pie.
Non-alcoholic cocktails.
Good. What else? Oh boy, what a great table meal spread. We do have so much to be thankful for. So let's give a little thought this morning as we worship God and continue to worship Him in our lesson this morning. First of all, so good to see so many of you that we haven't seen for a while. And Josh, good to have you home from college. And we miss your taking part in the service, so good to hear that prayer today. And as I mentioned in Bible class, we're soon going to be saying goodbye to some of our snowbirds, so everybody kind of give them a hug this morning as they prepare to go south. Several weeks ago now, Jeannie came home one day from work. She gets home around 4 o'clock, almost pretty much right on the dot every day. And she came home and she was pretty animated. And she went on to tell me that she had been listening to someone on the radio and that they were talking about the importance of leading with grace and following with truth. She didn't know the name of the person. I don't recollect that she did. If she did, I didn't write it down. But I've been thinking about that thought ever since she said it to me. And so I want to explore that idea this morning in our lesson. And I think it's a message that we all need to hear and heed. In Colossians 4 and verse 6, as Keith read, the Apostle Paul writes these words of admonition. He says, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned, as it were, with salt, so that you may know how to respond to each person." Let your speech always be with grace. Certainly the topic of grace is one that ought to preoccupy our minds and hearts as Christians, but in this text, Paul is not saying, he's not saying, let your speech always be about grace. He says, let your speech be with grace. In this particular usage, grace can mean maybe some of the following. I looked up the word in the dictionary. I thought I knew what it meant, but sometimes you need a little fine-tuning. The first definition of grace is seemingly effortless beauty or charm or movement, form or proportion. Somebody's great, a ballerina or something like that. Number 2, a characteristic or quality pleasing for its charm or refinement. Now I thought about this Nancy mentioned oyster stuffing. A lot of times the people speak of Southern charm. And I was laughing and kind of chuckling. I grew up the first 9 years of my life in Pensacola, Florida, and then the next 9 years I was in Ashtabula. So I'm kind of a mongrel. My mother was a pure Southerner, my dad was a pure Yankee, and so I'm kind of a mix. And sometimes I see both angles of things, but in the North, at this time of year, most everybody talks about turkey stuffing. Now the oyster adds a different slant to it there, but a lot of times the stuffing that we get up here around Thanksgiving is like it's breadcrumbs or croutons and it's stuffed in the turkey. Well, down south they have a different way of looking at it. They don't want to talk about stuffing a turkey. They're a little bit more refined. Let's dress the turkey. So they talk about turkey dressing. And it is different, by the way. It's usually made out of cornbread instead of breadcrumbs. The difference between turkey dressing and turkey stuffing is probably a little bit of grace, a little bit of Southern refinement on that score. Number 3 in the definition, grace is a skill, listen to this one, skill at avoiding the inept or clumsy course, a sense of fitness or propriety. And then number 4, a disposition to be generous or helpful, goodwill. That's what grace is. Paul goes on to add in his Colossians 4 text, he says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned as it were with salt. I think most all of us know that since ancient times, salt has been used in so many different ways, good positive ways, and it really has over the years has become kind of a staple in our medicine cabinets. It's like vinegar. It can be found to offer a wide range of medicinal benefits. Sometimes you gargle with it. Sometimes you soak your feet in Epsom salts. I pulled a little muscle in my thumb area and was soaking my hand in some salt water not too long ago. It helps with digestion. It serves as an antiseptic for things like insect bites or scrapes or whatever. It helps with sinusitis. Jeannie has some kind of a salt spray she squirts up her nose in the dead of the summer to help with things like that. And it prolongs the life of foods, thankfully, that can help feed us and delight us. But more to the point of this particular verse of Scripture, salt enhances flavor. Having been born in the South, Jeannie much more so than I, both of us were raised on grits. Most everybody probably in here has eaten grits. Has anybody in here never eaten grits? Well, quite a few, more than I imagined. Frequently, I've had some of my Yankee friends tell me that grits are horrible. They're just utterly tasteless. Something to that effect. But it makes a world of difference, doesn't it, when you add some salt to grits. I think Cracker Barrel stores, restaurants have done a lot to introduce grits to mainstream North United States. But even there, sometimes they don't put the salt in them. And if you don't put salt in grits, they don't taste very good. But salt really helps them out a whole lot. Anybody in here ever eat boiled peanuts? A few of you probably have gone golfing down south. Maybe grits are like boiled peanuts in that they're an acquired taste. Years ago, we used to go with guys golfing down south, and I would make some of the young boys eat boiled peanuts. Nick, do you remember those days?
Very much.
Yeah. And most of them, I did not care for them one bit, but it may be an acquired thing. It's kind of like last week ago Saturday, we were at a restaurant in New Wilmington with our tour group, and Cindy Clark, they were taking her and John's order, and they said, what would you like to drink? And Cindy said, I don't know if you said sweet tea, she said tea. And then she might have added sweet, and they said, well, they looked at her and said, we'll bring you tea, and then the sugar's on the table. And the look in Cindy's eyes was, that's not going to work. That's not, and it's not the same, is it? Why are we talking about this? Speaking with grace is the equivalent of speaking words that are well flavored. Truth is vitally important, but so is the way we present truth. If I had to give a synopsis of what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes, that's it. Truth is vitally important, but so is the way we present truth. And this gets right to the heart of the point that Paul was making. And it made me think of another passage from John's Gospel, chapter 1 and verse 14, which tells about the incarnation of Jesus coming in the flesh. And it says in verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of, can anybody finish it? Full of blank. Grace and truth. I wouldn't want to argue about it too vehemently, but the order here may be important. Jesus became the Word and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. I'm thankful, I'm very thankful that our fellowship, the churches of Christ as a rule, at large, that our fellowship has taught the importance of teaching truth. There are many churches that really don't emphasize that too much anymore. Whether that be from the pulpit or from a lawn chair, the proclamation of truth for us is a priority. And while I would never want in any way to diminish this great emphasis on preaching the truth, I would like to add, so is the manner in which truth is presented. It's so important to present the truth, but it's also very important to concern ourselves with the manner in which we present truth. And I think in both regards, and I'm trying to not be too hard on us here, but I think we first of all, some of us really need to bone up on the truth. We're getting kind of sloppy. And secondly, probably I can safely say that most all of us need to refine our skills in the presentation of the truth. How do you go about presenting the truth? And are we doing it in a graceful way? I once heard a story. This is one of those stories that sometimes we call preacher stories. I heard about a man who attended church habitually, but he never responded to the gospel. The preacher would preach, no response, Sunday after Sunday. And one day another preacher came, maybe it was for a gospel meeting or for some other reason. And this man responded and was baptized into Christ. Everybody in the church was amazed. And finally someone asked him, what was it that finally moved you? And his response was something like this: Many have told me that I was lost and going to hell, and they almost seem like they enjoyed telling me that. But this man, this preacher, told me I was lost, and it appeared to me that it broke his heart. And he said that's what made the difference. Now, as I said, the story might be a fabricated one, but I doubt it. I doubt it because have we not all seen that scenario play out in the lives of our local churches? And I suspect that this happens far too often. And this strikes again at the very heart of what Paul's text here in Colossians 4 addresses. We've all heard this saying, people don't care how much you know until they first know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they first know that you really care. And this may be one of the chief ingredients or a key compass point in the sharing of the gospel. While in the process of sharing the truth, many of us have failed quite miserably at speaking with grace. And sometimes we wonder, why don't people respond more? And maybe we need to step back and ask ourselves, are we speaking with grace? Not just about grace, but with grace. Some seem to have taken an in-your-face approach to speaking truth. And then there's some that seem to enjoy letting others have it with both barrels. And perhaps unwittingly, unknowingly, both categories of teachers come across as arrogant know-it-alls. And that kind of approach turns people off to the truth rather than turning them on to the gospel. In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16, would everybody turn there, please? Matthew 10 and verse 16. There, the words are noted, words that Jesus spoke to his apostles. He was getting ready to send them out on a preaching mission. Sometimes we refer to that as the limited commission as opposed to the Great Commission at the end of the 3 years of Jesus' ministry before he ascended back to the Father. Then he gave the Great Commission, but this is an earlier commission. And he said to his apostles, in particular disciples, he said, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be shrewd as serpents and harmless as doves." Now, here's two metaphors, a serpent and a dove. And of these two, I think we can grasp the metaphor of being harmless as a dove. One time, back when we still had Siggy, we had some mourning doves that camped out in the rafters of our little back porch area. And one day they were out on the patio picking up little kernels of whatever. And Siggy went out, and his instinct, impulse was he's going to eat one of those doves. And we really got all right. I wouldn't have had any problem had it been a chipmunk or a squirrel or some other varmint, but he was not going to eat a dove. Not a harmless, beautiful little dove that wakes you up to cooing in the mornings. We get that image, being harmless as a dove. But what did Jesus mean when he told his disciples to be as shrewd as serpents? Neither of these two words, shrewd or serpent, sound very good. They don't sound like they are part of having redeeming qualities about them. And we normally think of shrewdness as cunning. And that word cunning usually connotes a measure of deception. So we don't normally think of being commended to go about and be shrewd. Think how you can connive and how you can be deceptive and come out ahead. That's really not what Jesus is talking about here. And secondly, as a part of this other metaphor of the serpent, not only who wants to be shrewd, but who wants to be like a serpent? And I'm convinced that Jesus was not reflecting on the serpent, Satan as the serpent depicted in the Garden of Eden. You can read Genesis 3 and verse 1. Jesus wasn't thinking of that when he said this. I'm not saying he forgot about that. That's not what his point was. At the time that Jesus spoke, in that time period, and probably still so, a serpent was recognized as a creature with keen insight. Additionally, they are quite adept at avoiding their enemies and at the same time catching their prey. As we moved north when I was about 10, I constantly played in the woods behind our house. It was like I had died and gone to heaven. All of a sudden, we had a really nice wooded backyard. I had a football team called the Cleveland Browns and a baseball team called the Cleveland Indians. We had none of that in Pensacola. And then to add to the delight, you could actually play with the snakes. Down south, that wasn't part of the bargain too often. But I constantly played in the backwoods, and I liked catching snakes, but they were not easy to catch. They tended to slither away. They really weren't eager to confront for a confrontation. In fact, we used to have to prod them. Just to freak out my three sisters, I would make the snake bite me on my little finger, and then I would come and show my sisters, and they'd all go squealing to Mom, and then I'd show my mom, and she'd freak out. And anyway, you had to work at getting the snake to bite you. It wasn't just like, hey, you want to hang on my finger? You had to really push it in his face and make him. My point is, snakes are not generally combative. And even on survival shows, this bear guy and some of these other ones, Cody, and the survivalists often take a similar approach. Don't bother them and they won't bother you. Isn't that generally kind of the way it is? So Jesus was sending his apostles out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Now, in case you don't know this, wolves like to eat sheep. So his instruction was essentially, look, don't go out trying to pick a fight. Don't go out trying to start a fight. Rather, be careful. You're going out in the midst of wolves. Be crafty. Be smart. Paul's words in this immediate context of Colossians 4, if you back up to verse 5, here's what he says. It's very much like be shrewd as serpents and harmless as doves. Paul there says, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of your opportunity. Conduct yourself with wisdom. That word wisdom could be the word discernment. So in sharing the gospel with others, in whatever arena of life, there is simply no place for harshness or rudeness. All right, now, we're going to be done here in a little bit, so I do not want you to nap on this. I want all of us to listen carefully to what I'm saying. Being abrasive and belligerent is not a good way to win friends, and it's especially not very good at trying to save souls. Neither is evangelism a place for speaking inflammatory and or accusatory words. Instead of being combative and caustic, let's aim to be charitable and considerate. Let's work on speaking with grace. Let's choose our words carefully. Let us aim to say the right words at the right time, in the right setting, the right place. That can be quite challenging sometimes. But I think if we can do that and do it well, it will make a huge difference in how we're able to reach and touch those that we long to. Proverbs says it this way: like apples of gold in a setting of silver is a word spoken in the right circumstance. Now we all blunder here. I can think of many times that I have said things, several times where Jeannie has come to me and she says, "Boy, that was really genteel of you to say that." I won't tell you what I was saying because it would be double bad. It was bad enough that I said it in the setting that I said it, and I'm not going to repeat it for the whole congregation, but she would say, "That wasn't very nice. That wasn't very genteel of you. That wasn't very charming. That wasn't with grace." And we all struggle with this. And in sharing the gospel, truth is imperative, but so is tact and diplomacy. Now, if you think that just because you're saying the truth, that you can be mean and harsh and all of these other bad things, you need to rethink your tactic for sharing the gospel. Possessing discernment is part of being shrewd as serpents. Discernment is tact and diplomacy, trying to think how is the best way that I can share this nugget of truth with others. Our assignment is not just to speak the truth, but to speak the truth in love, as Paul said in Ephesians 4 verse 15. Two brief illustrations and then we'll close in prayer. First, from the preaching ministry of the Apostle Paul. Acts 17 tells of an occasion when Paul visited in the city of Athens. What a city it was. In Acts chapter 17 and verse 6, Luke records that while Paul was waiting to gather with others, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he was beholding a city full of idols. Verses 18 and 19 notes that some Epicurean and some Stoic philosophers invited Paul to join with them and go just a little path away to the Areopagus, which was sometimes called the Mount of Ares, or Mars Hill is how it's translated in others. And this was a place that was meant to honor all of their gods. Imagine being on a hill, instead of seeing tombstones, there's statues to all of these gods. So the Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers invited Paul to go with them to the Areopagus, and that would provide a setting or a venue whereby they would ask Paul, "Tell us about your God." Now notice that Paul, how he begins his message, Acts 17 and verse 26. Here's the way he starts. And he didn't begin in an insulting or incendiary kind of a way. He doesn't go on a rant. He doesn't come across as holier than thou. He doesn't even quote Deuteronomy 5, 7, and 8, which is what most all of us preachers nowadays would do. You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make for yourself any graven image. He doesn't even reference Deuteronomy 5. Paul's spirit was provoked within him, Luke said, but that provocation did not translate itself into being mean-spirited, not in the least. In fact, in verse 22, Paul begins on the Areopagus talking to these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers about the one God. He begins by giving them a compliment. Who would ever think of doing that in such a hostile environment? But Paul says, men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. Statues to gods everywhere. And then, very politely, very astutely, and we could even say very shrewdly, in a good kind of a shrewd way, Paul continues by saying in verse 23, while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. And then Paul goes on to say, some translations hurt a little bit here. Paul said to them, what therefore you worship without knowledge, or some translations say what you worship in ignorance. That sounds a little bit insulting, but ignorance, today people get all bent out of shape if you say they're ignorant. But in days gone by, it was just another way of saying you're not very well informed. You need to be taught. So the word ignorant was not combative. It was just a word that was used. But what Paul said, I found an altar to an unknown God. Would you listen while I introduce you to that unknown God, the God that you've never met before? What a marvelous way of teaching with grace. And lastly, from the teaching ministry of Jesus, and Bob Villers, I know you're going to be talking about the prodigal son soon, so I'm only going to be here for a second, so don't get upset that I'm stealing from your lesson here. This is one of those texts that we could look at 100 times and come away learning something every time we do. In the story of the prodigal son, we catch a glimpse. Actually, it's more than a glimpse. It's a deep insight into the heart of God, especially if God is depicted as the father in the story. And verse 20 tells us that there's a prodigal son or a wayward son who demanded his inheritance in advance, and then he went off and he spent it all wildly. But the son, in verse 20, finally it says that he got up and he came to his father, and while he was still a long way off, the text tells us that his father saw him coming, and he felt compassion for him, and he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son immediately begins saying, Daddy, I'm so sorry, and all of this remorse and all of that. And the text, verse 22, says, the father said to his servants, quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. What's really interesting to me in this story is what the father didn't say. Wouldn't the father have been justified to say, you did all of these things? You spent it all. You spent it all on prostitutes. You ended up in the pig pen. And now you want to waltz back. This is what the elder brother was thinking. But the father never said that. The father ran to embrace the son. The son could barely start saying, Father, I'm sorry. And the dad clapped his hands and said, bring the robe, bring the ring, bring the sandals, kill the calf, let's rejoice and be merry. And I want to close by saying that sometimes, listen to me good, sometimes speaking with grace can express itself in what we don't say. is called biting your tongue. Sometimes there's such a penchant, we want to retaliate so bad. And sometimes the best way we can speak with grace is to bite our tongue and not say what we think we should say. And this story should speak strongly to all of us, to our hearts, about a better way of dealing with domestic strife and waywardness, and we all have it in our families. Our aim is never to make a family member or a friend wallow in guilt or even grovel in remorse. I think we've been out of shape on that in the past. Sure, we want people to straighten up and fly right, but to somehow delight in watching them suffer and coming home, rather, the desire of our heart is to rejoice in the restoration and salvation of anyone and everyone. Now, there's so much more that can be said to this, but will you take it home and think on it? It's a great post-Thanksgiving thought. How do we speak with grace? How do we always let our speech be with grace? Would you bow in prayer? Father, thank you so much for your wonderful gospel. It's so strong and so powerful, so cutting to the heart in many ways. But Father, today we're asking that you help us to add to our abilities, to our satchel of skills, this wonderful trait of being able to speak with grace, so that we might win others, that we might strengthen others, that we might help others to find you and to come home to you. Bless us in this endeavor. Through Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you so much for your good attention today. And if we can help you in your walk with the Lord, if you have never died with Christ and been baptized into his death, we invite you to do that this morning. For most of us who are believers, this lesson is a real assignment for us all, and I want us to take it seriously. Let's learn to always speak with grace. Let's stand and sing as Brian leads us.
For confusion, we're going to go with the one on the screen, 381, if you're on your book. 381.
Near the steady vanity and pride, caring not thy Lord was crucified. Knowing that it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul
7:19, we'll need to do boys.
Angry words, oh, like an ever from my tongue's unbridled slip, may the heart's best impulse ever check them ere they soil the lip. Love one another, thus serve the Savior, children obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus serve the Savior, children obey the blessed command. Love is love, to pure and holy, friendship is too sacred far, for a moment's reckless folly, loves to desolate and mar. Love one another, thus save the Savior, children obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus save the Savior, children obey the blessed command. Let our words be sweetly spoken, let our thoughts be greatly stirred. Show our love to one another with abundance of kind words. Love one another, thus save the Savior, children obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus save the Savior, children obey the blessed command.
Most holy Heavenly Father, we once again come before you, thank you for all the many blessings you bestow upon us. Thank you for sending your Son, that we may have salvation. We ask you to be with those that will be traveling south, give them a safe journey. We ask you to be with us as we depart